Hello and welcome to the Warrior Artist Podcast, bringing you insights into artist practice to inspire you on your creative journey. My name is Aideen Glynn, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Aideen Barry. Aideen is a visual artist based in Ireland, but with an international profile. Her work incorporates performance, sculpture, film, text, and experimental lens-based media. It explores a broad range of themes such as domestic labour, environmental changes, classism, intersectionality and human vulnerability. She is a member of Éadaoin and the RHA. She has won numerous awards and her work is in prestigious private and public collections globally. Welcome, Aideen, and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to chat with us today.
A pleasure, Aideen. Thanks for having me.
Did you always want to be an artist, Aideen?
Yeah, I did. I have to say, I really didn't have any other prospect in my future. I think I always wanted to be an artist. I think my earliest memory has always been involved in creativity, and probably much to my dissatisfaction of my parents that I wanted to be an artist because it was a very hard thing for them to understand, I would say. But in time, certainly my mother has completely accepted the fact that I'm an artist and everything.
I guess there would be that fear, isn't it, of art meant being impoverished and on the breadline, and there was a fear of poverty. That's for their generation.
Yeah. Of course, and especially like the Ireland that they grew up in, the understanding was you have to get a CID, you have to get a job for life, you have to get like the pensionable job, or else the danger was you're going to have to emigrate and we won't see you again. That was, I guess, the generation before me was that understanding. And I guess I am the first generation in my family that stayed in Ireland and walked away from the permanent pensionable job. So to take on the precarity of the artist's income. But yeah, totally.
And in art college, were you always drawn to performance lens-based media? Is that the one that appealed to you most?
I have to say I struggled in that first year discipline when at first year in art college you get shown everything. And I really struggled to make a decision about what to do. But actually what happened was I got meningitis when I was 18 in first year in art college, and I ended up in a coma for 6 months. So I ended up only doing 2 blocks, which were sculpture and I think photography or like lens-based media and things like that. And I actually really thrived in that. So when I woke up, I was like, I better go into those disciplines anyway. So if I'd only done painting and maybe ceramics, I would have to do a course. So it was a really life-changing moment for me, actually. First year in art college is a complete blur. But second year, then I went into sculpture, and sculpture in Galway was run by some really progressive teachers who really believed in sculpture as a kind of a philosophy, but actually that you try everything to try and weave practice together. And so I'm given carte blanche to try whatever I wanted to do. And I've always adopted that approach ever since. So I don't really see the medium. I just see what could be achieved in artistic production.
Oh, that's really interesting. And that explains your broad range of interests. And I was really curious as well. You have such an international focus. You're an Irish visual artist, and it's obviously very important for you to have an international focus. And is that something that you deliberately decided, I want to do this with my art career? You talked about not emigrating and choosing to be in Ireland, but at the same time, you're very much focused on working abroad and exhibiting abroad. And how did you go about doing that?
Like many an Irish person, I struggle with what my identity is, like what it is to be Irish. And then you're thinking about this idea of like post-colonialism and how do you ratify what it is to be post-colonial? And so with my practice, I'm always thinking about like, how do I align with other countries or other artists or creatives who are also trying to struggle with their identity or have ever been othered in one way or another? My practice, I see it as it's like a nerve, a branch of a larger central nervous system. And that central nervous system is global. So it's like, how does my work have resonance with artists or non-art audiences who would like to collaborate with me to talk about identity or to talk about these issues these kind of socio-political issues that I'm interested in. And I don't think it's possible to be an artist in isolation because the context of where you're operating kind of determines how your work is being read. So whether you're an artist and you're like, we're all really concerned about the environment right now and what's happening with global disintegration of our climate. And for example, And then how does that kind of read into your practice? Or how does like feminism or intersectionality resonate with your practice? Because the topics of our time, and these are the social, political dilemmas of our time. So that's, I guess I've always been interested in that discovery of it, like who I am, the great human condition. But then also, how does that resonate with somebody in, say, a township in Masipulele outside of Johannesburg in South Africa? Or how does that resonate with the Lithuanian who grew up under kind of a post-Soviet occupation or that sort of thing? So it's like, how is there resonance or kind of conceptual commonality in the way that we think? I hope that answers that question.
Very good answer. When you said that, Aideen, actually, the image that popped into my head was the imagery from the Song of the Bleeding Tree. You talked about the roots and the branches. And it's very interesting how you're exploring these really huge, really important, really anxiety-making themes. Folklore is common to all these cultures, like Irish folklore. There might be connections with other folklores in other places. And I know you access the UCD archive, folk archive, as a source of inspiration. I'm just wondering how that started. Did you contact them? And also, how large is it? Like, how far have you got in and how much is left to go?
My interest in folklore, it comes from, again, that quest for what is my identity, right? And what is your identity? It's who are we as a people? And yet folklore is the voice of the proletariat. It's the voice of the people. And it's older than some of the systems of oppression that existed within our country. So I'm really interested in that voice or that knowledge that often happened in domestic environments. Like a folk tale would be told in front of a kitchen, surrounded by people coming in for some like soup or cup of tea or something like that. Or a tale would be told in these kind of domestic or intimate environments. And then it's also rooted in when our language was banned, that it existed in this like spoken word tradition where it happened in secret and in these secret spaces like hedge schools or that sort of thing. And then I was aware of the folk archives mostly for some research I was doing with the Irish Traditional Music Archives. I was commissioned by them to respond to the Bunting collection. And what happened was in 2020, they did an open call for a couple of artists to respond to the digitization of Edward Bunting's manuscripts of banned and outlawed music, and particularly the Irish harp. I was totally disturbed to hear this story that Irish harp was banned by Queen Elizabeth I, that this was a kind of a colonial act that went hand in glove with banning our language, and like a cultural genocide that happened to us as a people. And so I started looking into these archives, which are digitized and then they're freely accessible. They exist in Queen's University in Belfast. What happened was this 19-year-old Protestant musicologist called Edward Bunting in 1796. He wrote down the last remaining Lilson heirs of the last living 11 harpers who were all dying, and the tradition of Irish harping was going to die. And if he hadn't done that, our sacred Irish harp, which has UNESCO World Heritage status, would have died. It's just shocking to think of, right? And it took this incredible endeavour by a teenager to save our Irish harp. So the archives are available. They're all online, which is just such an incredibly generous socialist gift. So you can go to the Bunting archives and you can see the scores, and you can see his inflections, how he wrote down the music from this kind of classical musical background, which is not Irish traditional music, but it's like a different knowledge set. And I thought, this is so interesting. Let's look at other archives that are available. And I was aware of the ducas.ie archives, which is the school's archives, which is administered by University College Dublin, which is also freely accessible. So you don't even have to leave the safety of your home. You can just go online. And as the pandemic happened, I went straight into all of these archives online, and I found the incredible schools archives, which came from 1937. Eamon De Valera, who I'm not a fan of whatsoever, but I am in admiration of this endeavour. He sent a task when he was President of Ireland that he got all 9-year-olds to go out and interview the oldest citizens in their parishes or villages. First of all, when you look at the handwriting of the 9-year-olds, you will be absolutely staggered by how beautiful the handwriting is. You will feel a sense of personal shame about your own handwriting for a start. But then the 9-year-olds, they interviewed people who'd actually lived through the Irish famine. That gives me goosebumps. And they wrote down these incredible stories or knowledge of old knowledge, of folklore, pishogues, cures, of notes about poison plants, things like that, all from their locale. So you can put in your parish or your locality into the search engine in Dúchas.ie and you could find out all of this incredible lore from where you're from. So I found the story about the bleeding tree. I was really interested in poisoned lands or particular folklore about poisoning because I was using that in this project called Oblivion. And as part of that research, I read about the bleeding tree. And the story about the bleeding tree is somebody goes to knock down a blackthorn or a hawthorn tree or cut it down, and they get a thorn into their hand. And within 24 hours, they are dead. And then somebody else goes out and they try and knock down the hawthorn or blackthorn tree, and then they get another thorn in their hand, and they die 24 hours later. A cow walks into the thicket of the hawthorn, and the cow dies. And then a group of lads go up to take the tree down, and the tree sings at them, "You are cutting me. Stop. You are cutting me," like it's a warning. And I thought this was such a beautiful metaphor for what we are doing to the natural world, where we have lost connection with the natural world. And then I read more into the tradition of these particular trees. And there still is a Western Ireland tradition that farmers would take the afterbirth of the cows out and they would put them onto the roots of these hawthorn and blackthorn trees. And occasionally the mythology is that the trees cry or they bleed. And I thought this was just so lovely. And it is also known that women used to do the same thing. They take the afterbirths and they put them onto the trees. And so in a weird way, we have this connection to these particular trees. And then I draw these parallels with because we're 50 years joined the European Union. And when we got all this investment to build these motorways by the European Union, we actually used to drive the Germans mad because we never made our motorways straight. We actually moved them around crops, what we call these fairy trees, which are the same trees. But it's almost like we know that they contain our DNA and that there's this long lineage and long tradition that we place parts of ourselves onto these trees. So I thought this was like a lovely thing to explore. And then I was asked to bring this work to Salzburg, or make a piece of work for Salzburg in Austria, which is during the biggest festival in Europe. It's called the Festspiele, which is this big opera festival. So I worked with this incredible composer called Steve Shannon, who I've worked with on a number of projects. And I said, could we make something like a libretto or an opera for this capital of opera in the world? And so he worked with Joan O'Malley, who's an incredible soprano, and Mary Barnicott, who's the cellist from Crash Ensemble. And I wrote the libretto, and we constructed this aria of the song, The Bleeding Tree, which warns, "You are cutting me. Pages are the ghosts of trees past, the trixial lineages." So it's this sadness. That's an incredibly sad thing. And the placentas kind of breathe like the lungs of the opera singer in this kind of installation that's currently running in Salzburg in Austria. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer, and I hope I answered for you. Sorry.
No, I thought I've only seen it from your website, but it looks very compelling, very beautiful, very eerie, very sad. And I'm so curious how music is so powerful for you. You talk about old art forms and the oral tradition of our stories, but songs are also so important. And you talk about these harpists, and that was an exhibition you did, Oblivion, which is also very powerful, about the harpists nearly dying out. They were the last musicians and they were preserved. What if we are the last artists now? That you talked about, we're living in this age of anxiety. Definitely we feel, our children feel even more strongly about all these problems that are happening with the climate change, and everything seems to be coming to a head. What do you think the role of art is, and the role of artists in this time when you're talking about connecting internationally? What can we do?
I don't exactly know what the role of the artist is. I battle with this myself all the time. But I feel in a way we are like a vehicle. I see artists as a vehicle that carries a language or a message. I don't know if our responsibility is to change the world. I don't think we can. But what we can be is like messengers of the dilemmas of our time. And as you're saying, Aideen, like we're living through the great age of anxiety. And my biggest anxiety is I'm worried we are the last of the artists. I'm worried that there is very little being done about what is happening, about global disintegration of our environment. And this project that I was doing called Oblivion, it was like looking at artists who also have been thinking that they are the last. So I like, as well as working with an Irish harpist like Aisling Lyons and Stephen Shannon, again, my partner, Conal Murphy. And I also worked with this incredible Inuit throat singer called Reet, who's a pop star from the Arctic Circle from Nunavut in Pangerton in Nunavut, up in the Canadian Arctic. And she is using pop culture as a kind of a vehicle to bring back an art form that was banned. Inuit throat singing was banned in Canada up until the 1980s, which is absolutely shocking. But that is the reality, and that is what colonists do. And she felt that she is one of the lost artists. So she's using pop culture to carry a message. So she's using music as a Trojan horse. And I totally thought that's exactly a very interesting idea. How popular culture can be like this Trojan horse or this vehicle for getting the message across. So that's why we made this kind of apocalyptic pop song called Oblivion, Shock Malta in Irish, Quailumtaduk, which is I'm murdering it by pronouncing it incorrectly and she'll be very cross with me. But anyway, it's the Inuit way of translating oblivion or being the last. And we created this kind of multimedia piece. We also worked with the incredible conceptual artist, Margaret O'Connor, who designed these crowns that were worn by the performers. And we tried to get this message across of being the last. And it was a weird project because in a way it became viral and it ended up on these big outdoor billboards. We did a live concert. We pressed a vinyl record, and then we used the proceeds of the vinyl record to buy trees to plant. Myself and my partner, mostly my partner actually, Cathal, has been planting these trees on our land to offset the carbon footprint of the whole project. And yeah, we were just trying to think about doing something in a kind of an ethical and responsible way so that we're not making any more stuff or we're in any way contributing to more carbon or more pollutants in the way that we made the project. In a weird way, like I'm just trying to be like holistic in my thinking about making a project like that so that I don't come across as a hypocrite or that I'm not oblivious as well, coming from a place of privilege and being aware that I have a responsibility as a white Western artist making this work. I'm also sharing the stage with an Indigenous artist, so it's also making work on equal footing, talking about the same things. So it's a very interesting dichotomy. But anyway, I don't know, to be honest with you, I just don't know what the role of the artist is. In a weird way, I struggle with it all the time. Shakespeare said that art's role was to hold a mirror up to the world. That's fair enough. But then Brecht said that art's role is to take a sledgehammer to the world. And I actually, in a weird way, I agree more with the Brechtian idea as well. I hope that answers that question as well. Sorry.
Oh, these are great answers. But your work is so interesting. We were chatting before and I was saying I have so many questions. I can go into so many different areas because each project is just so fascinating. I love how you connected this pop singer with her art form that is dying out with these old harpists who were like the pop singers of their day. And then you made a pop song because pop songs, we talked about art being accessible, like pop music, TikTok dances, like that's what's accessible to people rather than necessarily art in a museum.
That's it, exactly. When I think about, I've said it before in other interviews, like I'm from a working class background. When I think about like how I accessed visual culture from the start, it was always through popular culture, say music videos, which is weird. There's this weird full circle that's happening with me in my practice at the moment. I was saying this the other day to somebody. I remember clearly watching Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer music video that came out in 1986. And the animation that was incredible. It was created by the brothers Key and Aardman Studios, who were really influenced by Jan Svankmajer, who's one of my heroes. He used surrealism as a way of talking about political oppression. And this music video has become like the most successful music video of all time. It's like the most streamed music video ever. And now, just this past year, Peter Gabriel has come to me and we're now collaborating on a project that on his tour. And he's taking one of my elements of my work for his tour. So it's incredible. Everything's come full circle. But it's only because I started moving within this idea when I started thinking about art as a liquid state. It isn't any one thing. Art is like something that it's like a chameleon. It keeps changing and moves between theatre, architecture, dance, It's a political movement. It's something else. It's always in a state of flux. And once you start thinking about that, then you can be a part of something much larger, which is just magic, totally magic. Yeah.
And you're right, it is the ultimate Trojan horse in terms of how it can connect to the lyrics or the song. And that is amazing that you're going to be involved with this concert. How many more people are you reaching? And it's taking art out of the white box of the museum, that it is more directly accessible.
Yeah.
So which of your projects is going to be involved with this concert?
I actually can't really say yet, actually. So that's all the QT so far. But
very cool, though.
Watch this space is all I can say.
Very cool. And it's interesting that you talked about the song Sledgehammer, so the reference back to the Brecht, and like it's another like little connection. Everything's connected. You recently made your debut film as a feature film, Klostes, if I pronounced that correctly, which means folds or pleats. You've obviously done a lot of shorter films and more art films and stop motion. What was the challenges for you in moving into feature length? And what were your personal highlights or like learnings from the project?
I think Klostes, which your pronunciation is fantastic, is better Lithuanian pronunciation than myself, Aideen, I tell you.
Lucky shot there.
It was really a very special project because, again, it wasn't just me that made this. I ended up collaborating with nearly 1,000 people in the city of Kaunas in Lithuania. So they're all Lithuanian citizens, really. They are all artists, composers, sound designers, Foley artists. The vast majority of the people involved in this project are volunteers. They acted in the film. They acted as extras. They were dancers. They made the makeup for devils. They constructed sets, and they had to make the stop motion animation, which was laborious. So how this came about was as an academic, I have to give papers on my work, and I was in Pech in Hungary, which had been a European capital of culture. And I gave a paper on my work where I co-create work with non-art audiences. So these are citizens who are curious about the role of the artist, and I bring them on board and we create something together. And in the audience of the curators from Kaunas 2022, and they said, would you come to Kaunas, which I had never heard of, and which I'm really embarrassed to say this now, but I'll give the same paper there. And I went to the city and I gave the paper, and my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe how beautiful the city was. It's this Art Deco wonder kramer. That's the way I describe it. Every building is beautiful. And then I heard this really sad and tragic tale about the city, about that it accidentally had become the capital of Lithuania from 1919 to 1939. They had these ambitions to make it this great European capital. It was a space of huge multiculturalism, a huge jazz festival. So jazz bands from New Orleans and New York would fly in and play in Kaunas in the 1920s. So you had people of colour. It was an incredibly progressive city. There were trans and non-binary artists who moved there and lived these very gender fluid lives. They sent all their architects out to study under Corbusier. So that's where the style comes from. And they came back into the city and they made this absolutely beautiful Art Deco civic space, like all the civic infrastructure of a city in the space of 20 years. It all came to a crashing end in 1939 when the Nazis invaded. And together with the Lithuanians, they killed every single Jewish citizen. And then 4 years later, they're invaded by the Soviets. And then anybody who's left, like Aideen, yourself or myself, anybody who's critically engaged or anyway invested in culture, they're rounded up and they're put on trains to Siberia and they're never seen again. The Lithuanians call this time period the occupation. So then the Soviets move all their citizens from all over the USSR into the city. And they say, now you're Soviet, you're USSR, you're Russian, you speak Russian, you assimilate. And so there's this like weird loss of identity. 1991, they get independence. And then they spend the next 20 years trying to understand who the hell they are. And the buildings are then associated with kind of trauma. So a lot of the time they just knock them down and they want to look Western. So these incredible curators, architects and academics said, we need to save our cultural heritage. So they're going to make a bid to make this the European capital of culture. And then that's where they approached me and they said, we want you to work with us to help the citizens fall in love with this architecture again, because they don't know what the architecture is. And I was like, this is too big a job for an Irish person. Like, I'm not Lithuanian. And it's too great a responsibility for me to tell your story. And the only way this is going to work is if you tell me your story and we create it together. So I work with this incredible writer called Sandra Bernadette, and she's an actor and involved in drama, and she also works with these incredible short stories and prose. And she worked with these amateur writers, and I asked them to go out into the buildings and tell me the story, what's in behind the walls. Who were the people in there? Give me fiction, give me fact, merge it all together. And then we construct the story like Italiano Calvino's Invisible Cities. So it's like the tale of one city within a city. So it's like a series, like you observed, like I'd only ever really done shorts. So that was the way I tackled it. I said, I'm going to make this a series of short films that they're all connected in one way or another, like loop back. And so we created it together. And I worked with these three incredible composers, one of which was only 18. Yeva Rabota hadn't gone to college. And I said, you have to play, because this is going to be a non-verbal film. I need the main protagonist to be the architecture. So the architecture has to have the composition, it has to be the sound. So they went off in their three different ways and they created the sound and the compositions for all the films or all the sequences. And it just became this incredible project. It's just been acquired by IMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, the National Collection, which is
congratulations.
Fantastic. I'm really honored. Yeah, totally honored. But it was one of the most joyous things I've ever been involved with, I have to say. Absolutely joyous. And even with that, it's not any one person. It isn't me. It isn't them. It's like a collective together that made it.
That is a great way of doing it, because that is a huge responsibility. If you were saying what they approach you to do, that is very daunting.
This is also ethically not right. I can tell you a little bit of my Irish identity, but I can't tell you anything about my Lithuanian identity. I'm not Lithuanian, so it's not responsible to do that. I think it's more responsible to share the platform.
And that non-verbal decision, which recurs in a lot of your work, is that deliberate? You use music as the voice.
Often I feel that language lets you down. And I actually think that the strongest thing that works for me is like the visual medium. Like it's like the best language I have. I'm fluent in that. Whereas this language I'm completely shite at. And then also I love music. Like I identify music in every way. It's like this other medium that's like a great vehicle for communicating this emotive state. Those are the things I feel really strong with. I don't feel incredibly confident about spoken word. I like collaborating with other writers like the amazing Sinead Lisa or Deirdre Griffith, for example, because they are excellent in those fields. So I like working with them, for example, in that way, where it's not my muscle. It's not the thing that I can flex, that I feel really confident about. Yeah, I think that's the best way to answer that.
And then it's curious how you, even though you're not interested in spoken word, you use written text to great power. And I recently went to see the National Gallery of Ireland have got an exhibition called It Took a Century, which is celebrating Irish female artists in the RHA. And your contribution is so powerful because you chose not to exhibit a piece of art, like your drawings were on exhibition in the RHA at the same time, but you exhibited a very beautiful, very elegant piece of protest. And it blew me away. I'm just wondering how that came about, how you decided to do it in that way, because you could have decided not to have anything, to have a blank wall, but you wrote something. And then I noticed I bought the book, and in the book, your artwork is in there, but you're the only artist where there's no written text beside it. You just have the artwork. There's no blurb. There's nothing about you. And also, lastly, is what the response was from the National Gallery. A lot of questions there, sorry.
I've been really very public on record in my objection to the absolute dysfunction at the National Gallery of Ireland and their appointing of Aramark, which is an absolutely horrendous company which profits from this horrendous system called direct provision, which is in violation of international human rights, which still exists in Ireland, and it's an absolute travesty. It's the Magdalen Laundry scandal of our time. Is direct provision and its treatment of primarily people of colour. Let's be fair that this is a racist system. It was absolutely shocking that the National Gallery appointed Aramark to run their cafe contract. I've been very public about that, but also the National Gallery have a also record of censoring artists who protest. So there was two fabulous artists, Brian Teeling and M.O. Kane, who removed their works off the walls during the Zurich Portrait Prize. And then the staff were instructed by management of the National Gallery to cover up that protest. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. And I thought that was absolutely abhorrent. I've been recently elected to the RHA, and I'm still trying to figure out where my role in that organization goes. And I heard that they're celebrating their 200th centenary of its existence, and that they wanted to celebrate, which is absolutely admirable, the representation of women, which has been this horrendous struggle to try and get parity both in its membership. First time ever they have a female president, Abigail O'Brien. And then there's this strange relationship where there are members of the RHA who are appointed to the National Gallery board, which has us hawk back to the colonial days too. So it's all kind of conflated in this strange setup that I don't understand that relationship either. But there was this plan to do this show called It Took a Century at the National Gallery, and it was to show all women members in this show. And it was expected that all the women members would show. But at several of the meetings I said I'd prefer that we didn't. And I actually went and I got another museum in the UK to possibly do the show. But the members really voted that they would like it to happen in the National Gallery because they feel it is our National Gallery. I was told I could do whatever I wanted. And I said I would do a protest piece. And I worked with a beautiful typesetting artist who assisted me. And we do a protest piece. Actually, before that, I was told that they were going to put a poster to say I wouldn't participate in that. There would be an objection to me putting the poster on the wall. So I said, if I turn it into an artwork, then it can be simultaneously, like a Schrodinger's cat. It can be simultaneously dead and alive. It can simultaneously be a protest and it can be an artwork. So I created a very solemn, very small protest work of this subtly embedded text outlining exactly my objections to showing in the National Gallery while this contract is still in existence. And also I can also highlight that in the catalogue, and also if I title the work exactly the same way as the text that I'm including, then that can't be censored, because then there will be consequences if it is censored. So I title it in exactly the same way as the piece. And then I also requested that they remove my bio and details within the catalogue. And fair play to the staff in the RHA, they all backed me all the way with that. But it's the reaction of the National Gallery of Ireland. The reaction of the National Gallery of Ireland has been non-existent, which is okay. That's fine. I see where they are and they see where I am. That's all I can say on that matter.
What's curious as well, because I didn't know this, I just wandered in, and I think the way I went in, I saw your work towards the end, and I saw it, and because we were going to be chatting, I went to take a photograph of it, and straight away this security guy came over and said, no photography. And
really?
Yes, and I'm just wondering, they obviously would have that in exhibitions, but I've taken photographs all the time there, and that was the first time they jumped at me. So I wonder, was that because of your work they didn't want it? And it's in the catalogue, which I then purchased to have a photograph of it. I thought it was very beautiful and very elegant. And again, it's that Trojan horse, isn't it?
It's a Trojan horse. It's quite interesting that you face that situation. At the same time, simultaneously, there's a show called Oblivion Fontana. And the tagline, the marketing strategy that the National Gallery choose to represent this female artist, as they seem to be championing her by her gender, is rule breaker, whereas you're being told not to take a photograph of my work, which is interesting. It's not. That's a very interesting dichotomy.
I thought so.
Yeah.
So maybe that was, yes, you're being allowed in a certain way, but it had to be controlled, perhaps. And it's interesting because you talked about that protest with Armark. There was a lot of talk about that, and it's died down. I think it's the power of art. You talked about what are the role of artists to bring things like this to the fore, because we do forget about things in the news because there's more other bad news or other things are happening, and things creep on.
It's what side of history do you want to be on? That's the question I always ask myself. Do you want to be on the side of the people that are appointing somebody that's profiting off like basically human trafficking? Or do you want to be on the side of human rights? And do you want to be the rule breaker? Do you want to be the person that's going to say, you know what? I grew up in Magdalene laundries. I grew up where Catholic Church was selling babies to rich Americans. I grew up where we didn't have bodily autonomy. Am I going to stand by and say that I'm going to be on that side of history? Am I going to stand by, or am I going to be on the side of history where I say, no, I do not want to be associated with this, and this is a travesty? And do I use that platform that I've been given to say, because that's the space of privilege, I've been given this platform to show in the National Gallery of Ireland, right? Then I'm going to be a rule breaker in that regard, and I'm going to stand on the right side of history about this and say, no, I have to answer to my own children and as well later on down the road. And I want to be principled about that and give them a good example too.
And it's interesting, I know the RHA had this goal about having it no longer being a boys' club and having more female members. The RHA to me still, I must say, seems mysterious. We have a female president there, and there's a female head of the National Gallery of Ireland and in the Crawford in Cork. There seems to be this shift. And there still obviously is underrepresentation of all minorities, not just women, all minorities in the art canon, in solo shows and in collections. And internationally, it presumably is the same. If you had the power, if you were able to make changes, Aideen, what steps would you take, or what steps do you think the art institutions should take to try and correct this, or what would you do?
First of all, I would never have any appointed boards where there's a relationship where you are automatically from one organisation on the board of another. I think those days are long gone. I think also we need to represent what our society is within our board makeups and within our membership. So sex is not binary, gender is not binary. There's many genders. So that's one thing I would say that also needs to be addressed within representation. Also, the representation of the traveller community in membership like the RHA, people of colour, LGBTQ+, ethnic minorities. Ireland is not this monocultural place, and it never was. So we need to make sure that we are represented right across our sphere. And I suppose that one thing I would say is if it would be very helpful for everybody to undergo EDI training, which is equality, diversity, and inclusion training, just to understand about like what their unconscious biases are, what their blind spots are, to be able to see where representation is. I do think we are better than most as a country, actually, in what I'm experiencing when I go out into the world. But we still have such a long way to go in terms of equality, such a long way to go. And in terms of raising everybody up, we have a huge cost of living crisis that is really affecting people horrendously right now, and we need to do something really radical. The universal basic income that's been trialled in 2,000 artists is really radical, and that's a really good thing. But we also need to move that out and give that to absolutely every Irish citizen, not just artists, to raise everybody up. And so the model at the moment is it's been trialled in the artists section, which is fantastic. And a shout out to the control group of the people who didn't get the universal basic income, but are also filling out the paperwork on a weekly basis, because they're giving the metric data to show how important it is to live with the universal basic income. And that will be hopefully the case to roll it out to everybody in our country. And then we will be a European leader, which will mean that then hopefully it'll be rolled out across Europe and the EU, which will make Europe a world leader, which will make that UBI thing a global thing. We have a long way to go, but that's me in my space of privilege again saying these things, but we have a long way to go. And I suppose the thing is always to be aware of what your privilege is and how you can extend the hand to raise somebody up, always, not pull up the ladder behind you. I think that's really important. But that's my mouthpiece over.
And you do that. You mentor a lot of people. You do, like, in terms of like you're higher up in the ladder, and you do help other artists.
Yeah, I try. I really try. I think it's really important. I also wanted to demystify what the role of an artist is in society, because as we started off with that conversation of saying it was like, are you somebody that goes on the dole? That was the kind of the narrative of what an artist was. Whereas like we actually really know that we need artists. Like during the pandemic, when everybody reached the end of their Netflix accounts and they'd watched everything, they realized, oh, they need people to create this kind of creative content. And they realized that they needed artists in a way. I want to normalize the artistic profession as much as possible, but also I know what it's like to be on social welfare or be a single parent. I know what it's like to come from a working class background. So it's really important for me that I democratize the industry that I'm in to other artists who have been othered in one way or another. So I do a lot of mentoring to support other artists who are from disadvantage, or not entirely that way either, but it's also just about saying that we're part of a community. And the idea of just being the solo soothsayer artist, that's a mythology, and actually all boats rise together if we all help each other. But I am very lucky, like I'm an Éadaoin and I get a canoeist, and so I'm supported to live as an artist. So I'm living the dream. So I'm trying to do as much as possible with this space of privilege to help others out in whatever way I can. Yeah, I hope that answered the question. It was really flaky.
Not at all. You seem to me as very industrious, like you have an enormous work ethic and you seem to be creating all these opportunities. How do you manage your time at all this travel and residencies with life and family?
Badly.
Like us all then. Like us all. Okay.
Badly. I try. My poor kids, I think, are a bit fed up with me. I probably made a bit of a mistake going away to New York for 4 months at the start of the year. I was on this residency and I was doing a little bit of teaching, and I was having a kind of a dreamy moment. I won this lovely award to do a residency there, but I couldn't bring them. I could only bring them out midway through for 2 weeks. And it hurt us all. And I realized I can't ever do anything like that again. Like the most I can ever be away from home in one period of time is maybe 4 to 6 weeks. Because I'm not a one thing. I'm a part of a unit, and I don't do well on my own. I need to have my loving family around me and my support partner around me and things. And then most of the time it's chaos. Like yesterday, I got a call to say that I am going to be in Benin in October for the Lagos Folk Festival. And then the next week I have to be in Veszprém in Hungary. And I have to be back in time for a wedding in Ireland, and school books and child therapy appointments or Lego camp, and library books need to be returned, and the ESB bill needs to be paid, and all this thing is all happening at the exact same time as everything else. So it's total chaos. And at the same time, it's a great fun ride, and I wouldn't change anything. But but it is chaos. Like I can't say that it isn't stressful at times. And you do spend a lot of your time going, how in the hell am I going to be in 4 places at the same time?
It seems like you're thriving on it. Like you don't seem to be getting overwhelmed.
Makeup does wonders to hide the stress line.
The lipstick, yes.
No, I'm living the dream. I always want this. I'm living the dream. I can't knock it. This is fantastic. This is what it's all about. I'm really lucky, and I'm going to do as much as I can to raise the visibility and profile of Irish visual art in the world. That's my role now.
That's brilliant. And what advice would you give to somebody listening, an emerging artist who you're not mentoring?
Don't be alone. That everybody struggles, and reach out to other artists and normalize the conversation about things like rejection of grant applications. It happens to us all, to me too, believe you me. And when you get that rejection letter, don't give up. Just keep going. Even if you're using spite to drive yourself along, at least keep it going. I saw a very funny quote the other day saying, how do you do it all? And the quote was like, I'm actually driven entirely by spite. I thought that was
powerful. I'll prove them wrong. I'll prove them wrong. That's brilliant. You're currently in your home in Tipperary, in your studio there. Can you describe that first? Because I know your work is so multimedia. It's on computers, but you also have a drawing practice. What is your studio like when you get to be there?
Right behind me here, this is where I come in the winter time to do my drawing and reading and thinking, and I edit here on this computer, because the outdoor studio, which is this 5-bay tractor shed, we bought the house 6 years ago, and we actually bought it because of the 5-bay tractor shed, which we've been slowly converting into this like grand design project of a studio. But it's like a tip. All my money goes into like insulation and fixing leaks and building other things and repairing this and stopping weeds climbing into the roof and all sorts of things. But anyway, it's a magic space out the back where I can turn it into a film studio or a space of production to build a piece of video furniture or cast something. My partner is a musician, so we have a sound recording space at the end where we recorded part of Oblivion and things like that. It's just magic, but it's Baltic in the winter. So I have a seasonal practice where I'm inside for the winter and outside for the summer. That's the plan anyway. But yeah, it's magic. And for years, I spent money on miserable studio spaces in Galway where the walls are crying and all my money went on studio rent. And I'm really lucky when we bought this house, which we got for a song in 2017. Then we're able to invest and make it our dream home and turn it into the space where I can practice. And my plan is like when I get invited to other residencies, I invite families, artists with dependents, whether you've got a parent who you're minding or a child who's your dependent. You can come and stay here and you can work in my house and studio while we go off on whatever adventure myself and my family get going. So we've done this a few times now with other families where they can stay here. The only caveat is to look after my 2 dogs, my dog children. So that's it. But yeah, it's
like a residency swap. I love that. Yeah. And do you travel? Do you bring your family with you on residencies when you can?
Most of the time. Yeah, most of the time. So like we just went to Salzburg because I had the show, but I also had a residency there and the family came out and they get to have the holiday experience while I get to work. That's generally how it works. And then I'll take a few days off. We went to Legoland and things like that. Yeah. And then we had an artist friend of ours here who's working on painting practice, and he looked after the dogs while they were out. But that's generally how we do it. Yeah. I can't actually do holidays. I can't turn off. That's probably the problem with me is I'm a workaholic. Because the mind is always going about, oh, I could do this or I could do that. I just can't turn off. And it's best just to embrace it and give the family the holiday experience. So we've gone to Vermont. They've come there, do New York a few times, San Francisco, Canada, Germany, Catalonia. All of those have been like residencies or projects that I've been involved with. So I bring the family out. They get to chill and I get to work.
Yeah. But that's important as well. We're talking about that gender balance in the art world. For women who often are the ones who are responsible for the family and aging parents, that they can bring people with them. Otherwise it's for people who don't have families, it's for people, young artists. So it is a way of breaking that barrier down. That's a wonderful project. And I'm just curious, you mentioned a surrealist artist. Who else are your art heroes? Or is there somebody you would have loved to have met?
I'd love to have met Frida Kahlo. Because I think Frida Kahlo and I have very similar political philosophies. For sure. And I just love her work. Ramiti Sparrow is somebody I've become really interested as a kind of forgotten surrealist. She's a Catalonian Mexican artist as well. So I would love to have met her. Louise Bourgeois, obviously, I've said it so many times in interviews. I had a plan to go to one of her salons in New York. She used to do this thing where she'd open her home as a salon on a Sunday and invite you along. Talk about your work because she wouldn't go out, and this is how she stayed connected to the art world. But she died the year I was going to go out. I was just so devastated at that. But you know what? She has permission to die too. God love her. But yeah, I'd love to have met her. I have many friends that went to her salons, and she loved Irish people apparently.
And you mentioned Peter Gabriel. What else are you working on at the moment? What's coming up?
So I have a meeting now. I'm going to be working with the Centre of the Less Good Idea and the musician Philip Miller, who is William Kentridge's composer. And we're talking about making an opera on Dr. James Barry. I will be going to South Africa and hang out with William Kentridge and Philip Miller in January. And we're sowing the seeds of that project at the moment. I am going to do a film, I think. I'm going to take elements of Cornelia Sparrow's paintings, which is incredible surrealist paintings, and I'm going to turn them into moving image films. And what else am I working on? I'm making an edition with the Salzburg Kunstverein, and I have just been invited to Benin, the Republic of Benin, as part of Lagos Photo Festival, which is Lagos in Nigeria, but it's the neighbouring country. I'm going to bring the Song of the Bleeding Tree there, but I'm actually going to rework the music with local musicians in Benin, because I discovered that both in parts of Nigeria and parts of Benin, they also have a tradition of putting placentas of afterbirths onto the roots of trees. So change the musical score and collaborate with musicians out there to create a new version of it for Lagos Social Festival. I think that's the plan. And then I have a 2-person show, Investment with Esther Sabo. And so I did a project last year to celebrate James Joyce's Ulysses. I made a mural with trans and non-binary young people at Sambathai in Hungary. And while I was there, the other commissioned artist, Esther Saboa, and I really hit it off. And she said, do you want to do a 2-person show in Veszprém, which is this year's European Capital Culture? And that's going to be curated by the Irish curator, Sarah Searson, who I worked with recently. So that's going to be in Veszprém Kunsthalle in November. So I have loads going on. I'm sure there are other things that I've forgotten to tell you as well. But yeah, there's loads of other things going on in the background. There's usually about 8 or 9 projects going on in the background.
Brilliant. And is there any plans for the Song of the Bleeding Tree to be exhibited in Ireland?
Not right now. There is a version of the Bleeding Tree that I made for Junk Ensemble. So I'm doing a collaboration with Junk Ensemble, which is an incredible dance troupe, Megan and Jessica Kennedy, and they've choreographed this project. We were involved with Jessie Jones and Irene Buckley, the composer, and Planet Rock and it was commissioned by Midsummer Festival in Cork. It was called Ritual. That's now evolving into this thing called Powerful Trouble, which is a dance performance. It's going to actually happen in the REJ in October as part of the Dublin Theatre Festival. So part of the Bleeding Tree manifests in this staging. If you want to see it, it will manifest in that. It won't be the same thing as the installation that you see in Salzburg, but you might get it. And there's some other elements that I've also animated. There's like a cracking floor, like the way the soothsayers of Delphi would release vapors. This was inspired by Jessie Jones's research, actually, into the oracles of Delphi and how they could see the future and they could tell what could potentially happen on battlefields and things like that. There were these oracles would hit the floor and it would crack open because it was under a volcanic fault line, and these vapors would come up and cause the oracles to hallucinate, and they would give these tales, more folklore, more storytelling on here.
So the dancers dancing on the floor, then there's a floor projection.
Yeah, they crack
in
the
it.
floor. Yeah, they crack the
very.
floor. Yeah, and I've animated the floor so that it cracks. There's all this dust that takes the projection. So yeah, it's a really fun project. This version will have Alwyn Fleury, Vicky Lyon again, Amanda Coogan, Jessie Jones, and Irene Buckley as well, and Katrina Frost as well involved in it.
In the RHA. Wonderful. That sounds really interesting. So where can people find more of your work? I'll obviously put links in the show notes.
So definitely on my website, aideenbarry.com. I guess I'm on social media channels like Instagram as well. And I came off Twitter because I hate Elon Musk. I'm no longer on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook as well. And there's a couple of galleries I work with. Gallery IH in Malaga in Spain, Virginia Damsta in London, who used to run Rifle Makers as my agents there. So if you follow them, they will tell you what else I'm working on.
Aideen, thank you so much for sharing all these insights into your incredible work, and wishing you every success with the many projects you're doing and with all your ambitions for raising the voice of Irish visual arts abroad. It's wonderful. And maybe we'll check in the future and hear more about Theatre Gabriel and whatever else you're doing by then.
Thanks, Aideen, and thank you ever so much for having me on board here. It was really nice to finally meet you and to talk with you as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, we were planning this since I think February. I think we first connected, and then you're just all your travels. I was in Kerry. You were like, I'm in New York. I'm here, back. It was like I was going between Cork and Kerry. That was as far as I was going.
And that's exotic enough now, to be honest with you. I
was deeply impressed by all your travel and managing it all and juggling it all. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for listening. I'm going to include links to Aideen's work in the show notes. And for everyone listening, have a great week in the studio. Remember, you too are your warrior artist, and listening to Aideen, we've all got to keep going and not give up. And if you have the time, I'd be very grateful if you could subscribe, follow, rate, or even write a short review, as this helps others find me. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next week. Bye. Stop.